Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am blessed with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, Gertrude. I'm very happy that you reached out. I'm very happy to be here. I'm based in Ottawa, in unceded territory of the Mohawk communities. My name is Maïka Sondarjee. I am an activist and a researcher on epistemic inequalities. So what that means is that I look at who gets spoken to, who gets to talk, who gets listened to. These are called epistemic inequalities. It's about epistemic violence. And you know what? I think everything started when I traveled for the first time to the country of my ancestors in Madagascar. I'm mixed race. My mom is from Canada and my father is from Madagascar. In 2019, I went and I was studying journalism, but then everything started to change. I started to see huge inequalities in the world, colonial inequalities, racial inequalities, gendered inequalities. And so I couldn't just continue doing what I was doing, being a journalist. So I came back and I had the privilege to study in great schools and in international development. And while doing that, to study international relations, relations between countries, between the global north and the global south, I also realized that most of the people I was asked to read were white men from the global north. And so but I wanted to study inequalities and structures of power and structures of oppression. And then I realized even in the field, there were inequalities. Who we were asked to read were basically all from the same viewpoint. And so I continued doing the PhD. I worked on inclusion of local population at the World Bank. So who gets to write the policies that are going to get implemented in aid recipient communities. And I started to see that we were including, the World Bank employees were including people, but then again, in a quite colonial way, meaning that you can get included, but power can not be shared. You can get included, but then power stays in the hands of the same people. And so I started to think of all that, and I started to study in the field of international relations, who gets cited, who gets quoted, who gets assigned in reading lists. What I saw, obviously, is that not only women and people of color and people from the global south were marginalized, but also thinking from some places and not others. So syllabi showed that we are assigning a majority of theories that are written by men, but also written from a non-gender viewpoint, what we think is universal or neutral. And it invisibilizes feminist approaches, global south approaches, third world approaches, post-colonial ones. And so these inequalities there. And then because of my background in journalism, I also saw that everything I read in the media, always all the journalists and all the articles I was reading were citing men as experts in my field, in international relations, but also in any field. And I encountered one of my great mentors, Sherry Graydon, who founded an organization called Informed Opinion, who was helping women write in the media, op-eds, and give interviews to journalists. And I thought with my background in university and my background in journalism, I could help other women to, like me, start to write in the media, because that was another epistemic inequality, another inequality in terms of who gets cited and who gets to share their voice. Because I hate the expression giving the voice to someone. Everyone has a voice, just not everyone is listened to. So the great article by Gayatri Spivak, Can the Subaltern Speak? Her argument is often misunderstood. She's saying subalterns have been speaking this whole time, just haven't been listening. And so my research on who gets a voice at the World Bank, and then my research on who gets cited in international relations, and my research now on white saviorism and international development, I realize is all linked by my desire to visibilize some voices. And I've been lucky to have had great mentors and colleagues who helped me along the way. My last big project was a book, an edited volume on white saviorism, the concept of the white savior complex, the idea that we live in a structure where there's a lot of oppression and exploitation, but then white people from the global north or people from the Western countries in general will go in Africa, for example, to save poor communities. And I did that edited volume with Dixon Kanakulia from Uganda and Temris Khan from Pakistan. And we managed to build a community from all continents, just people from the global south who were able to voice their concerns about racism in the field and coloniality in the field. So I've also edited a volume on feminist approaches and international relations, then again with 31 scholars, including indigenous scholars, scholars from Haiti, from Senegal, from all over the place. And I feel like my biggest accomplishment really is that people trust me. I don't know why really, but people, when I reach out to them to do something with me, they agree, and it creates these amazing communities that I feel, I hope, are changing the world little by little. So I guess that's all I have to say.
Wow. What an incredible story. You know, listening to you speak, I can see the passion that you have around this topic. And I can understand why people trust you and want to work with you as well. It is electric. I can feel it right here in Australia. And your career has been absolutely fascinating. But I'm going to start off with just trying to find out more about your early aspirations. What motivated you, and what were the key moments or influences early in your life that led you on this path? I know the trip going back to Africa had a big impact. What was it that you saw that really hit home?
I think I saw it was like a mirror on myself, the mirror on my privilege. So I met a lot of family members that I haven't met before, and I started to ask questions about my own history. And I have a book project now about mixed race, being mixed race from two different worlds, and it's very important for people who come from different places or who have traveled or immigrated to connect with your ancestry. And there's a lot of African philosophies about that. And I started realizing that my grandmother was in an arranged marriage at 14 years old and started having kids at 16. And my dad is the last of 13 kids. She had him at 40 years old. And I listening about her story and how she lived her life and how she raised her kids and the resilience that she had to go through made me realize the privilege I had. So this travel for me was really discovering the country of my ancestors, but also discovering myself in this whole story, being so privileged to have been born in a country where, you know, I have all my rights fulfilled, that I can go anywhere, I can marry at an age that I want to, I can have only one kid, I can work if I want to. And it's not that we're better at all, it's that we built this wealth over the wealth and the freedom of other people in other countries. And so the more I thought about it, first in my first book, I was talking about these inequalities, and I was talking about capitalism and patriarchy, and then at one point it clicked when I read decolonial feminists like Françoise Vergès, like Sylvia Tamale, like Lugones, and they all put it together in terms of, well, it's coloniality of power. It's the fact that some countries before colonization were very poor. I'm talking about England, I'm talking about France, and they went to other countries and they stole the wealth and they stole people, they kidnapped people, they built empires out of the work of those people, and then they became rich. And so because I'm mixed with a Canadian mother,
Yes.
and an African father, I felt like I was like in between those worlds, but I had the privilege of one and not the hardships of the other. And so this all put it together for me. And then now I can't, you cannot, once you see,
You
I would
can't
say with a
unsee.
capital S, you can't unsee. Now I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to help other people realize those inequalities, mostly through mainstream channels. I give a lot of talks in NGOs and in government agencies and in mainstream media, because I feel like it's just things that we don't talk about, especially in colonial countries. I don't know for Australia, but in Canada, when I
Mm.
studied in high school, no one told me about Indigenous populations. It's
Oh,
really, it influences, it's not just, oh, people get to talk or not, or it influences what kind of knowledge we are confronted to. So it's
yeah.
very important.
Wow. So your academic work is quite impactful. Can you share more about your main research interests and how you decided to focus on these particular areas in international development and global studies?
So it's really about one of my main project now is systemic racism in international development. So what I call what Temris Dixon and I call white saviorism. So
Mhm.
it linked my research on, well, there are inequalities in the world, financial, capitalistic inequalities, and patriarchal and colonial. These big system, like it's quite impressive when you look at it, how some countries have have built wealth out of other countries. But it's
Yes.
also, then there's this, and then on the other hand, there's very well-intentioned people who go
Yeah.
to countries in the global south and then help, and I'm putting quotation mark. If you're not looking at the video, I'm really putting quotation mark. They help, or they want to save other people, like let's say
Yes.
René Bach, who a young missionary, a 22-year-old missionary, went to Uganda, opened a hospital for kids, malnourished kids, and then
Mm.
300 kids died. And because she had this feeling of self-importance, and again, really well intentioned, she went
Yeah.
there thinking she can help, but also she didn't have any background in medicine or anything. And all this is known through, activists like Charity So White, or white No White Saviors. And now I'm working on cases like that. So the case of Louise Linton, who is a now American actress who went in a gap year in Zambia a long time ago, and she wrote a book about it, very romanticized book about her romanticized African experience, who's been called out by a lot of African activists as white saviorism. And another case of Invisible Children, an organization that was aiming to save Uganda from Joseph Kony. It's called Kony 2012, but in a very paternalistic way. So
Right.
the basis of my activism is, we really need to address those inequalities through reparations and redistribution, but not
Yeah.
through paternalistic projects and charity.
I love that. So completing a PhD is a significant achievement. Can you talk us through your PhD journey at the University of Toronto, including your thesis topic, and how you navigated the challenges of doctoral research?
That is a good question. I feel like we don't talk a lot about the hardships of
Yeah.
doing a PhD as a woman or as a person of color, and it's very, very hard. But I had, again, the luck of finding a supervisor who became my mentor, Emmanuel Adler, who I would say is a feminist without, like, you wouldn't say he's a feminist, but you can see by seeing his mentorees that he supervises a lot of women, and in a way that's very, like, I think it's the first time when I met him, it's the first time I felt I was an intellectual being, that I had something to say, and that's
Mm.
what I wanted to reproduce. Like, and I don't know why. He just nodded when I talked, and but as women, I don't know if you live that, like being mansplained or meeting people who don't listen to you necessarily, even if you're the expert in the room. And so I think
Yes.
that support was really good. And what I felt throughout the PhD, and I wrote a piece about that, is that everything is a question of structure and luck. And not everything, not meaning that everything is just luck, but
Yeah.
there's a big part of it that is, and
Mhm.
privilege. And you can work as much as any other person and have all the capacities, but not end up like I did with a tenure track job. It's really
Mhm.
that part, like the winning and the not winning, and the article published and the article not published, and
Yeah.
that's really the timing. And it's really hard to calculate, and it's really hard to know what to do or when to do it. I guess I did a lot of, people call it networking, but I really called it like making friends. I think my mental health wouldn't have been the same if I didn't put
Mhm.
panels together and put edited volumes together. And so that's what I would suggest to the students that now I supervise. I try to value their work and try to bring them in conferences and stuff like that. But it's an accomplishment, like a lot of other things in life are accomplishments. I just think you need to be a certain type of person, but also it really helps to have privilege.
That's so good. Now, as a Banting postdoctoral fellow, you had the opportunity to engage in advanced research. What was your project and how did it contribute to your professional development?
Thanks. That's very interesting. Invite me again. Your questions are really thought provoking. I mean, so at first I wanted to, and I know you had to change some plans because of COVID. So I had
Mhm.
a research plan with SEWA, Self-Employed Women Association in India, which
Right.
is an organization of informal workers, women workers who work in all fields, like caring for children, but also rickshaw driver and cleaners and sewers, and their model is so interesting. They built a union-like organization and a bank, a co-op bank, to help these women because they were not organized, and being unorganized means you don't have any weight in front of the government for any pressure you want to do or anything you want to achieve for the people. And so they
Mhm.
managed to have a lot of things going on and a lot of success. But then, and I was supposed to study them as a case of success of organizing, and an intersectional case of organizing. But then COVID happened, and it's not the kind of research you want to do sitting on your desk. So that's
Yeah.
why I started doing a study of syllabi. So I studied syllabi in
Uh,
international relations to see if what I went through during grad school, which is only seeing men taught and seeing a lot of research that ignored the gendered aspects of the world. So, for example, in the
yeah.
international relations introduction course, I was a TA for, a teaching assistant. The professor would talk about world wars for 4 weeks, but without talking, for example, about the fact that during both world wars, but especially the second one, women went massively on the job market, and it changed the face of societies, European societies, forever.
Yes.
Or he didn't talk about proxy wars in Africa. He didn't talk about Senegalese military personnel going to fight for France, or he didn't talk about those aspects. And I was like, but you're talking about armaments and arms and alliances between these countries and these countries, and it's everything happened in Europe, and everything happened between men, and
Amazing.
everything that was important was men led. So
Mhm.
I studied syllabi to see if everything was the same, because we usually there was always only one session on women, quote unquote, or the sacrosanct week on gender of on a year-long course. And so what I found was even worse is out of 50 syllabi, more than half didn't even tackle anything in relation to gender or women, and even less about slavery or post-colonialism or anything like that, or indigenous issues. And I
Right.
think only 3 were really engaging with those issues truly, and the other ones were having this only week. And so
Mm.
we're not there yet.
And you see, this is why I created her story. So it's a pun on the word history. I am trying to capture as many women's stories as possible and write them into history as well. That's why our organization has got a publishing company. We publish the memoirs of all of the women that we meet. Until we start writing the stories, nobody's going to write them for us. That is the unfortunate thing. And I think a lot more women need to step up into the space and take what's ours. It belongs to us.
Definitely. We've been teaching the same history, and it's a history that's very partial.
Yeah.
It's not about everyone. It's not about the whole world. It's about a few proportion of it.
Select few. So you are a member of the board of series Feminist Reimagining of International Studies. Can you explain the vision behind this series and what it aims to achieve?
So it's a series at Bristol University Press, and and polity. So it's really more than feminist academic books. It could be an activist writing a book on feminist issues, but it's about deconstructing what feminism means and gender. And I think on the board there's a third of the members are men, working on masculinities and patriarchy in different ways. And so we're welcoming suggestions. It's a new series, so very open, and Bristol is very cutting edge in terms of what kinds of theory we wanna publish, and we want to have more global south authors, because as you said, the history is so partial, and that's mainly because the same people have been writing it. So books about anything about gendered inequality, largely written. And personally, I definitely include colonial inequalities, and because having a feminist mindset or feminist lens doesn't mean working on women. It means working on the world with a lens that's more complete. So any suggestions, any proposals are welcome.
Well, I'm definitely going to want to be a part of that. Please send me more information from the Global South, literally. That is an exciting project. Wow. So you co-initiated I'm going to butcher your French, so you'll correct me. Is it Femme's Expertise initiative?
It's Femme Expert.
How do you pronounce
like
it?
expert? Femme Expert.
Okay.
In English would be expert women.
Okay. So it aims at promoting women's voices in Quebec and Francophone Canada media. What inspired this initiative, and what challenges have you faced in changing the perception of expertise in the media?
When you read a journal or when you listen to a radio or a podcast, a mainstream podcaster, it's really surprising that it's still not, the voices are still not well represented. So out of 10 experts cited in the media as expert of XYZ, of forests or of the biosphere or of nursery or whatever, 7 out of 10 are men and 3 out of 10 are women still.
Wow.
So it's a great inequality about it, not about who is an expert, because let's say in being a nurse, I think not nursery, but the field of nursing.
Yes.
In that field, there's a majority of women, but still in the media, when a nurse gets cited as an expert on that topic,
always male.
Out of 10, it's going to be a man. Even in women-led fields. In international development, there's more women than men working on international development, but there's still a majority of men getting cited. So that's a problem that's linked to a lot of things. Women don't trust themselves. Men can have and I'm saying men, of course, not all men, but mainly men will have a certain expertise, and they're going to be ready to answer questions by media on much more than what they actually know, while women know a certain extent, and then they're going to be ready to talk only about a small portion of what they know. It's really, they're going to wait until there's an interview request on the specifically like their PhD thesis, while men are going to be ready to talk about more. So that's a question of like encouraging women to talk more, encouraging women to write op-eds, and I'm doing that. I'm giving workshops to women to know how to write an op-ed, like a letter to a media, because that's a skill that a lot of people, a lot of women activists or even women academics don't have.
Yes.
And it's
That's so
really
true.
it's a 1 day workshop that can change the way people write in the media, and then you can get published, and then you can get a social impact. And so that's
Yes.
helping women doing that, but also doing advocacy for media to say, hey, there's a problem here. You're not,
Yeah.
you're not representing, in my case, Canadian voices as they are in our society. So it's really anti-democratic. And so it's doing advocacy on that front, and changing in society also the idea of expertise. Who's an expert? Is it a
Yeah.
white man in a blazer, or can it be a black woman with dreadlocks? It can be
Dreadlock.
anything. It's just, it's redefining what expertise is. And so
Yeah.
I'm doing that really ends on with giving workshops to women about how to write, how to answer media interviews. And I tell
I
them to not speak as fast as I'm doing. That's my problem.
have to slow down.
I know,
So,
I'm sorry.
so since its inception, how has this initiative made a difference in the media landscape? And can you share any success stories or significant milestones that the initiative has achieved?
We started a database for French speaking. So it's with Informed Opinion, who has been doing that for the past 15 years in English Canada. But in French
Right.
Canada, we started it 5 years ago. We now have a database of 1,100 women who are ready to give interviews, who say, who write in their profile, this is my expertise, this is my number, this is my email, you can write to me. So that journalists, they want, it's quick. Journalism is very quick. You need to have names, and you need to call them, and you need to have you find people easily. And so it's like a Google. You go, you type keywords, and you find experts who are women who have done work on such and such issues, who have done research on that or this, or who have been activists in that field, or workers. And so we've done that, and that's used. We can see how it's used, and it's used every day by journalists
Yeah.
around the country. And
Wow.
for me, it's really I seen a 20-something-year-old Muslim women in one of my workshops who wanted to write about, there was a law adopted by the government that prevents women who wear the veil, prevents them
Yeah.
to work as caregivers and
Right.
people in authority in Quebec. And she wanted to write about that, and she was a student. She didn't really know how. And after the workshop, she sent that letter to La Presse, which is one of our main journal in Quebec, and got published. And then she got interviews,
Wow.
and she was able to voice her criticisms. And it's just
Yes.
seeing, for me,
That's
that's why I'm a professor.
incredible.
It's really I do it, but it doesn't matter if I do it. It matters if a lot of people, if we all step up, and we
Yeah.
help each other stepping up, and it's the social sorority, it's the bell hooks sorority, where we need to be all together. We need to create a coven of women who are gonna be each other's champion, like what
Yeah.
you're doing. I'm really proud to encounter initiatives like that.
Wow. Well, now you're a part of the army. This is it. It's when we start collaborating, working together, sharing these ideas that we have strength. It's in collaboration
Definitely.
that we lift each other up.
Definitely.
So,
That's the words. We need to lift each other's up.
yeah.
It's really important.
So from your experience, what are the most significant barriers women face in academia and media? And how does your work, both as an academic and activist, seek to address these challenges?
Well, I mean, in my field writ large, I think the main obstacle is how people perceive you, and perceptions then lead to material inequalities and attributions of grants and positions, and so it's really, we need to see every human as potential intellectual beings, as having something to say, and we need to value what everyone has to say. And I can see it also when I see a black colleague who's speaking in a meeting, or my a younger black women colleague who, when she speaks, is not as much listened. And
Mm,
because I was trained in Canada, I am white passing, I can speak the right language, I can use the right tone, I'm
mm,
listened to. And I realized that. And as I said before, like when I started seeing that, those privileges, it's really hard not to see them. But then we need, as women, I think one of the obstacles is that we don't necessarily have the same networks, because we are new to this kind of, like, there is a few women, especially racialized women, in the University of Ottawa where I work, but it's really not the majority. I had also mentors who were white men for sure, but it's just harder to feel important and then show to other people, and then so people look at you also as someone who has something to say. I mean, this is linked to so many structures of inequality, but I feel like we can individually try to decolonize and demasculinize, I would say, our thinking and our worldview, and especially as women with other women, but in general, just value also our female students. Try to also teach in a way that students feel empowered and feel empowered to speak, and then they're going to be the next prime minister and the next professor. And
I love it. So let's have a little thought experiment, and I'm going to take you back into the past to that young woman who went back to Madagascar, saw these inequalities, felt she had to do something to make a difference. What advice would you give to young women aspiring to become academics and experts in their fields, especially those interested in international development and global studies? What would you have wanted said to you before you started?
I suppose you can't change anything about that, but it helps if you're born in the right, household and social class, and in the right with the right racial background, with the right citizenship. But that apart, what you can do is, I feel, trust your gut feeling. Don't be afraid to write to people, to professors you're admiring, because maybe one of them is going to have funding for you. Maybe one of them is going to know a pathway to study for the PhD with them. That's what happened to me. My prospective PhD supervisor was so kind. And I think that's another thing. We really need to be kind to each other in academia, because there's so much epistemic violence, there's so much symbolic violence, and so much like hardships, that I got to meet people who were kind. I also met people who weren't unkind. And because I reached out to a lot of people also to have advice, to have mentorship. And I feel like, believe in yourself and believe in your capacities, which, I mean, I had an undergrad in journalism. So I went to the library for the first time during my master's. I was like 23 years old. And so 24 years old. So I didn't really have any confidence in what I was writing, but I kept going, and I had an idea, and I worked a lot. And built a coven also. I'm following the scholar Miria, who's sending like newsletter every couple of weeks, and she's talking about this idea of sorority, and you need to have people around you to support you, and you need to support other people. And that's the only reason I think I finished the PhD, is having those people that you can complain with, you can play with, you can go to dinner with, and you can, go through the hardships. You can't do that alone. And I feel like we're an individualized society, and I really want to
go back to the communal way of thinking. So my last question is, looking ahead, are there any upcoming projects, research, or initiatives that you're particularly excited about? And how do you see your work evolving in the next few years?
Well, now that I realize what I'm really interested in the big picture, so these are epistemic or inequalities of voices and all that, what I want to study is inequalities, but in a global context between countries. So in international organizations, for example. So let's say in the context of COVID, I was very interested in how the expertise that was valued was the expertise of Western countries. And the most people dying were in Western countries. And then the WHO started saying, oh my God, when the virus is going to get to Africa, it's going to be off. Everyone's going to die. It's going to be like a death trap. And all these discourse in mainstream media. And then what happened?
It didn't happen. And it's because Africans have had these pandemics when it was just so fascinating to watch.
It's insane to me now.
People were compliant. Whereas in the West, people are fighting for their rights not to wear masks. And it
I'm
was
sure
so
people in Senegal were looking at Canada being like, what are you guys doing? Like, but then why were we so wary? And that's Felwine Sarr, who's a Senegalese economist and thinker. He was writing during COVID about Afro-pessimism. We always think that it's going to be worse in Africa because it's always worse in Africa. It's always bad and it's misery. And like, we just couldn't fathom the fact that it was actually better. And for so many reasons, a lot of countries had the expertise of dealing with those epidemics. And so they had all the procedures in place. Also, they have a lot of epidemiologists based in Africa because there's a need for that. Also, the population is younger, so less people were dying. I mean, so many reasons. But then the first intuition of mainstream media in the West and Western organizations was that it's going to be bad. So why? And why then were we talking about, quote unquote, the African miracle? Why didn't people die? And then when we were talking about New Zealand, we were talking about good policies. Like they dealt well with the crisis. While in Benin, we were talking about like a miracle. Why did that happen? So it's really about, that's also part of those epistemic inequalities. So unvaluing some people's expertise and assuming the worst out of some countries. And even I started doing that research when I called my grandfather, my dad Daddy, and he was telling me about the president of Madagascar who was talking about this herb called Artemisia to deal with the symptoms of COVID. And it's like a traditional herbal tea or whatever. And I was like, sure.
Yeah, about that.
And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, sure, Daddy, it's fine. Like, I was kind of not taking that seriously. And then I was writing this article. I forgot about that conversation. I was writing this article about the different initiatives in the continent, in the African continent, about COVID. And then I read that the Max Planck Institute in Germany was starting to research Artemisia, not as a vaccine or anything, but as a way to treat the symptoms, because the herb was already used for malaria and other illness. And then I thought, oh my God, now I think it's a great idea because I read that it's used by German people. Isn't that colonial? In my own family, I was like depreciating. So I thought, if I'm doing it and with my own people,
yes.
So I think
amazing.
That's my next big thing.
I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today. Very, very inspiring. And
my pleasure.
To meet you in New York when we have our event in New York, and hopefully you will bring some of your students, your colleagues to be part of the conference in New York as well. So I'll just wrap up. Don't go away. Thank you to everybody who tuned in today. The Her Story Circle is attracting some phenomenal women from all walks of life, sharing their knowledge, their skills, and their stories. Tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, and bye for now. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time,